Wow, okay, that's some tough acts to follow. Okay, thank you all for coming. This is an amazing crowd, and I'm humbled to be included in this group. I'm a science photographer. So when I'm getting my hair cut and I tell the barber that I'm a science photographer, they say, oh, so you take pictures through a microscope, right? I say, well, not exactly. I spend a lot more time dressed like this. And so I've photographed over 40 science expeditions since 2002, more than half of them to the polar regions, and so I've spent about 2 years of my life kind of dressed like this. Chasing scientists around from Barrow, Alaska, in the springtime where it was minus 40, and they're studying sea ice formation and the tundra, to my personal specialty, working on icebreakers. This is in the springtime in the Bering Sea, probably one of the most beautiful and magical experiences of riding an icebreaker through the fresh ice that's just breaking up in the springtime. I've camped on top of the Greenland ice sheet to see features like this. This is called a moulin. This is what happens when you have ice and melting on top of the ice sheet, collecting into these rivers that flow down into holes and pass underneath the bottom of the ice sheet. And I spent a number of seasons living with penguins in Antarctica. This is a place, Cape Crozier, where 500,000 Adelie penguins live. It's a place so special that my son's middle name is Crozier. And I hope that someday he'll get to go to this place and see it like I saw it. And I'm not just bipolar, I also go to the equatorial regions as well. So this is the Congo rainforest, where I must admit the heat does make it feel like I'm melting inside. I really am a cold weather person. My heart is in the Arctic and the Antarctic regions. And this was from kind of one of the more recent shoots I did in the Antarctic Peninsula. That's a humpback whale tail there for scale. And closer to home, this is from the Gulf of Mexico. Actually, I got to swim with Alvin. Unfortunately, I didn't get to go inside the Alvin submersible to the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, but I did get to swim with the vehicle a little bit, which to me was an amazing experience in itself. So, you know, I thought probably the biggest question I get is, how did you get this cool job, and how do I get your job? And I get asked that a lot by a lot of high school students, a lot of college students say, how did you do this? I want to do that. I want to carry your bags and all this stuff. And I said, well, so a little bit about how I got to be doing this. And I grew up in Wisconsin, so I like it cold. And also growing up in Wisconsin, the first thing I wanted to do was get out of the Midwest and go to see the ocean. Right? I grew up with Jacques Cousteau specials, and that's what I wanted. That's after I just watched those endlessly, and I just said, I just want to be Jacques Cousteau. And so eventually I found my way to the East Coast. I went to the Naval Academy for my bachelor's degree, got a degree in oceanography, and then went up to MIT and Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, where I got a master's degree in physical oceanography, which did not involve playing with dolphins. It was more involved with playing with equations and about the physics of the ocean. But I did fall in love with going to sea and being out on a research vessel out on the waves, and it's an absolutely amazing experience. And so in the time that I was, and I'm self-taught photographer, and so when I wasn't on watch, kind of getting this unwieldy instrument over the side and collecting data, I was taking pictures of the research that was going on. And this is something that really hadn't been done before. People would take pictures of sunsets and whales and stuff like that, but people doing the work, it was actually quite uncommon to get pictures of this because it's very difficult to get onto a research vessel. And I had this amazing opportunity, and so I kept going with it. And then I got a big break. And so in 2002, my running buddy, Bob Pickard, he said, hey, you seem really into this photography thing. You know, why don't you come with me to the Arctic? I've got a 3-year project funded, working on icebreakers. Can you make a website? And I couldn't. So I said, yes, I can make a website if it means I can go to the Arctic. And he said, can you write? And I said, absolutely, I can write. And can you take pictures? And I said, yeah, I can do that too. And so the first project, what we did is I've just documented science for an entire month in the Beaufort Sea north of Alaska. And it was a magical experience. And at that point, I knew that science wasn't going to be enough for me anymore, that this was what I wanted to do, was tell stories. And so this was a big change, not just because of that break, but also because of a big shift in technology at the time. In 2002, 2003, guess what became commercially available and kind of easy to purchase for the first time? Digital cameras. And so this allowed us to totally transform the way we could do storytelling from the polls. I had a project called Live from the Polls where I worked with writers. This is Hugh Powell, a great friend of mine who I still work with. And I worked with all these different writers over a period of 2 years during the International Polar Year. This was 2007 to 2009. And what we decided to do was tell stories about science day to day and upload them to the web every day. So following the science as it happened day to day and making it live. And so there were some hurdles to that. We actually sent this dispatch from an ice cave in Antarctica during survival training. And that was probably the longest night I've ever had. We didn't sleep that night. It took a long time. For those who remember, the technology has changed so much since then as well. Like with your cell phone that's in everybody's pocket in this room, you could send 8 pictures now to the web in the time it takes me to finish this sentence. But when you're in an ice cave in Antarctica, okay, there's no Wi-Fi and stuff like that. What you have is an Iridium satellite phone, and the speed of that data connection is 1/10 the speed of dial-up. For those of you who remember that, boop, 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 and then you'd connect, and then you'd wait, and you'd wait. Well, 1/10 the speed of dial-up is 1/10 that, and so it could take 2 to 3 hours to send 8 pictures. But we did it, and the reason why we did it is to change the ways, particularly and our audience was elementary school kids. And what I wanted to do was say, science is not just something that happened years ago and is now in a textbook. Science is happening right now. While you're in your classroom, we did this today. And so I wanted to take that message to the kids and tell stories. And so the other thing that happened as a result of these multiple trips I did in the early 2000s was I got a really bad case of polar fever. So if you couldn't tell, I fell in love already. I fell in love with the polar regions, and it's something that I've shared and heard feedback from similar to other people who have been on trips to the Arctic and the Antarctic. Once you go there once, it's hard not to try to go back. It's a truly magical place. The light, in April in the Arctic, the sun will just kind of skim the horizon for hours and then go back up. It's an absolutely magical sight to see the ice like this. So I thought, now that I've told you what I do, I'll share a story with you. One of my stories I've been working on now for several years, and it's a story about frozen dirt. So, yeah, you guys are like on the edge of your seat now. All right. Okay. I think this, oops, that's going back. Here's a pointer. So this is where I'm going to take you on this journey. You see the star is in eastern Russia, so far east in Russia, it's almost Alaska. Okay, so, and what we were doing is studying permafrost, which is frozen dirt. And so I'm with this science team, and we're based in the town of Cherski, so you can see the Cherski on the map there. It's on this big river called the Kolyma River. So if you're familiar with big rivers like the Mississippi, you probably may not appreciate that there's 4 rivers about that big in Siberia draining northward into the Arctic Ocean. This is an absolutely massive, massive place. Siberia is 1/10 of the Earth's land surface, just Siberia. Okay, it's absolutely enormous. It's 8 time zones just to go across Siberia. Okay, but there's not a lot of people work here. I can't imagine why, but maybe you'll get that idea later. So in order to get there, we actually have to fly east. So I have to fly, when I'm leaving from my place in Seattle, I fly 19 time zones east to get here. And so that's 3 red eyes in a row, plus another 3.5 hour flight on this prop plane, and it's a kind of do-it-yourself deal where you load the bags yourself. And I travel with this big group of undergraduate students and professors and this project called the Polaris Project. And it was started by Max Holmes. He's a scientist at the Woods Hole Research Center, and his idea was, we can study the Arctic all we want, but what we really need is to bring up the next generation. And so his thought was to bring these undergraduates to this place in Siberia and let the landscape inspire them and let them fall in love with this place. And some of them did and some of them didn't, but I'll show you why. So let me take you on a tour. My first trip to Siberia was to the Lena River area, with just a small team, and it was an interesting trip for a lot of reasons. Early on in the trip, going through Moscow, I contracted a terrible stomach virus or stomach bug of some sort, and then I got a chest infection, and so I remember almost 40% of the trip, probably. But there was one epic moment. We took snowmobiles for, I think, 10 hours, and we finished in the dark. Snowmobile ran out of gas. There were all sorts of things that happened on that trip. Ask me on the break, okay? I can tell you all about the experience of getting to this location. But this is a place, Siberia, where ancient cultures and traditions still remain intact, okay? And subsistence, reindeer herding, and fishing are still a way of life there. And it can be cold. So when I tell people, again, when I'm getting my hair cut, that I'm going to Siberia, they're like, oh, what did you do wrong? Or, is it freezing? But in the summer, it's actually not freezing. In fact, it can be uncomfortably hot. If the wind blows from Mongolia up to Siberia, it can be 95 degrees Fahrenheit. And miserable. In fact, it's worse than the cold. Okay, it's hard to escape. And in this time, in this brief summer season in the Arctic, just life explodes. Okay, it's another myth that I like to, a common myth about the Arctic is that it's lifeless. And in fact, in the summer, it's anything but. It's actually it's thriving. It's full of life. We're above the Arctic Circle, so the sun never sets in the summer. This is at midnight, as dark as it gets. This rainbow persisted for about 3 hours. 3 hours because the sun really wasn't changing its position. There's this kind of mist and rain in the air. And so it's nice for people, for photography. And the taiga forest is the largest biome on Earth. Okay, it's home to great gray owls like this little chick that I found one day, moose, brown bear, all sorts of critters live in this forest and they reproduce and raise their young in this incredibly kind of harsh environment. So who's ready to go? Come on. It's a beautiful place, right? I've sold you on Russia, right? So there's one or two hazards to working in Siberia. So let's play this video, and I don't even know if I have to explain anymore here. Just a little bit about what it's like in the summer on a windless day, a beautiful summer day in Siberia. That's just a little taste of one of the challenges we have of working there, and another reason I like the winter. So the mosquitoes, I don't know what they eat when we're not there, because it's honestly, I don't think there's enough animals there to make it worth it for them. But in the fall, things change, and it's this beautiful environment of large trees, and it turns this beautiful golden color. It's an absolutely magical experience. So while we're there, and we're at this science lab, kind of on the edge of civilization, really, and it was started in 1980 by this visionary scientist, Sergei Zimov, and his family, and several other Russian families, and it's become this kind of mecca of Arctic research. It's really an amazing place. And Sergei is known, his big claim to fame was this grand landscape experiment he created called Pleistocene Park. So he took this large area of land in Siberia, it's about a 45-minute boat ride from the station, he fenced it in, and he's bringing in these big herbivores like moose, and he has some families that live there with little kids, and can you imagine growing up like this? Like, just the moose got away, we have to go bring it back. And he's trying to recreate the Pleistocene era, because in the Pleistocene, this was a tundra steppe ecosystem full of grasslands that was nourished by the poop of the mega herbivores. And so he's brought bison from Moscow, he flew them in, he's driven in boats up to Wrangel Island and taken muskox from there and brought them back to his park. And I'm sure he'd love to get a woolly mammoth if they can ever clone that and make it real. So this is one look at the station. Moose is on the menu a couple times a day, but a tomato costs $5. So fruit and vegetables are kind of hard to come by. We live on a barge. Sergei jokes that when the Soviet Union collapsed, he traded a Jeep for the barge, and then he built a little house on it. And so our whole science team lives on this barge when we're there. And the lab, he said, he bought this lab space as well. He said it was a former TV station. So we don't ask too many questions. It's a beautiful place. Right now it's an awesome lab space. We can do, one of the beauties of working in a place like this is that you can do all the measurements there and actually don't have to take a lot of the samples back, which can be a big hassle. So, it's not this beautiful above ground landscape that I've showed you that attracts all the science to Siberia. It's actually what lies beneath. And so this is permafrost. This is a permafrost tunnel. Permafrost is just soil that's been frozen for 2 or more years. Okay, and contained in that soil is actually the interesting part. It's carbon. It's the remains of life. All those animals who lived and died years ago, and the grasses and everything else that nourished them is now stuck in this soil. So the really mind-blowing part about carbon is, and about permafrost is, how much carbon it contains. If you added up the carbon in every tree on Earth, all the big forests, and then you multiply that by 3, then you'd get the amount of carbon in permafrost, just in the Arctic permafrost soil. So there's a lot of permafrost there, and that's why scientists care, okay? Because with Arctic warming, and in Arctic is warming 2 times faster than everywhere else on the planet, this permafrost, the temperature of that permafrost is going up, and it's starting to thaw. So you can see here, if you look at anything shiny, this is a riverbank exposure called Devoniar, a really neat place. Anything shiny is ice, and as that ice-filled soil warms, the icy part melts away, and it's left with these curious towers called Bergeracs. And this is really a great example of what this landscape could look like if warming continues. So now I want to play one more short video clip. I want you to hear from Sergei's own words what it's like to work at Devoniar, a little safety lecture.
If you will jump in the slope, it will quickly produce a sledge. And all of this soil will move like lavinas. Do you understand? Yes. And you will quickly die, maybe in 5 seconds. Therefore, don't keep your boots. It's something dangerous. Immediately move up like crocodile. Then you will build the bridge and will take your boots. Don't be modest. It's not so dangerous to be dirty. It's most important to be survivor. Do you understand? Let's go.
Yeah. So we all got the picture right away. There were no second questions about that one, and immediately somebody got stuck in this. When you land the boat and there's this section of permafrost goo at the very base there, it is like running through pudding. You run fast to the base. And Sergei gave us some more tips, like don't walk under that. So this is really what the future holds for Siberian permafrost all around Arctic region, okay? And what they found and what's really interesting is that it's kind of like a time machine, looking at that from the very surface layers all the way down to the bottom. This is Paul Mann. He really likes to get into his work, just literally get in there. And so he's collecting water samples, and what they can tell from the water is the age of that carbon. This carbon was 20,000 years old. And so as this carbon comes out of the permafrost and into the modern carbon cycle, it's kind of like taking meat out of the freezer that's been frozen for 20,000 years. It might have a little freezer burn, but actually microbes still love to munch on it. It's quite delicious. And that deliciousness is actually one of the things that they're measuring and studying here. This gives you an idea of what it looks like when you've got, this is basically permafrost tea, the water, all the rivers, all the lakes are permafrost tea. This carbon that's both dissolved and particulate in here. And so why do they care about carbon getting in here and how tasty and yummy it is to microbes? Because when microbes munch on the carbon, okay, they can release one of 2 gases, neither of which is super popular at the moment, CO2 and methane, both of which are really powerful greenhouse gases. So you can see how this leads to a positive feedback effect, whereas you get more warming, you get more permafrost coming into streams and rivers and on the ground and getting munched by microbes and turned into gases and going back into the atmosphere and adding to more warming. And so this is what methane looks like coming out of a lake. As you stomp around in any Siberian lake or poke a stick into the bottom, you get clouds and bubbles of this methane coming out of the bottom. And in the winter, Sergei does this little trick. All the lakes are frozen on the top, but the methane's actually bubbling up underneath and trapped under the ice. He takes a pickaxe and hits it and then throws a match down on it, and it makes this huge fireball, actually, of methane coming out. I should have gotten one of those off of YouTube. I've never seen him do that, but they're out there. So I don't want to end on a grim note. I mean, what's really encouraging to me about this story is the aspect of having undergrads involved. They've really it's amazing to see the transformation when you take these kids. Some of them have never been out of the United States to Russia. You plop them down in this place for a month, and you say, do a research project. It's incredible how many of them it's actually changed their lives. I think out of the 70 or so students that have been in this program since 2008, roughly half of them have continued to go on to do advanced degrees studying the Arctic. So the next generation really does give me hope for this project. These folks are my heroes. I love watching them work. I love watching them solve problems in the field. I love every science project I go out on, and it's just a thrill to be able to do what I do. Thank you very much.